Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming out in the cold. I think we are live. I'm just looking for some confirmation. Yeah, we are. Right, we'll kick off with this meeting. Item 1 then, any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we have 2 apologies this morning. Apologies from Councillor Jason Jones and apologies from Councillor Jill Burnett.
Thank you. Item 2, any declarations of interest? No. Straight in then to item 3, the minutes of the Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 14th of September. Has everyone had the opportunity to see them? It's quite a short set of minutes. I'll just go through each one. Page 1, page 2, and page 3. Everyone happy that they're a true and accurate record of the meeting? I'll sign them in. Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 4, Staffordshire Safeguarding Children's Board annual report. I think, Mark, do you want to open that?
Yeah, just thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly. I'm joined this morning by Sue, who's our independent chair of the Safeguarding Board. Our representative from a council perspective on the board is Helen Riley. There's a police representative in the temporary ACC, Jenny Mattison, and Heather Johnson from the CCG represents health. There's probably been a few changes as from when the report was done previously 12 months ago, which I'm sure Sue will talk about in her presentation. And then following the sort of overview of the board, there's the annual report that Sue will obviously talk about as well, and then we'll be able to answer any questions that any members might have.
Thank you. Sue, over to you then.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody. As has been mentioned, I am Sue Barnsley. I am the independent chair for Staffordshire Safeguarding Children's Board and have held that position since May of this year. The presentation that we're going to share with you today, I'm hoping you may have had copies of or opportunity to see it, but essentially what I'm going to do is just provide you with an overview of how the Safeguarding Board arrangements work and give you an insight into the statutory responsibilities of the board before I move on to the detail of the annual report for our performance in the previous performance year, that's 20 to 21. So essentially working together to safeguard children is the statutory guidance on safeguarding children. And that document was reviewed following the Wood Review in 2016, and the latest version of the guidance came out in 2018. It made a fundamental change to safeguarding because it said that in the new safeguarding arrangements, the 3 statutory agencies, that being the local authority, the Chief Constable and the Clinical Commissioning Group, now held equal responsibility and a statutory responsibility for safeguarding children and young people. So those 3 agencies are now known as the Safeguarding Partners, and in Staffordshire came together as the Staffordshire Safeguarding Children Board in January 2021. I will just share with you that prior to January 2021, under the new arrangements, there was a combined Staffordshire and Stoke Safeguarding Children's Board, but in late November 2020, a decision was made for those boards to separate. So we now have a Staffordshire Safeguarding Children Board and a separate Stoke Safeguarding Children's Board. Although, as you will see through the later presentation in the annual report, those 2 boards do share similar priorities in terms of protecting young people in the county of Staffordshire. So the vision of the board is simply that all partners are committing to working together so that every child in Staffordshire is safe, well and able to reach their full potential. And the board has the duty to ensure that all of the statutory agencies and frontline practitioners deliver on that vision. And the role of the board is to ensure that that vision is achieved and report back to yourselves and other statutory partners in terms of progress. The board principles are that this is child-centred, so the voice of the child is a phrase that you may have heard in previous settings. It's really about understanding what is the lived experience of children in Staffordshire and how does that impact on their well-being and their progress into their future lives. And we work hard to ensure that the voice of children and their families is heard throughout the work that we deliver, through our frontline practitioners. And it's a key message that we send out to everybody involved in safeguarding, that the voice of the child is paramount to all of the decisions we make. The board priorities currently are neglect, specifically for under ones, because this is seen as a significant risk group. And I'll give further detail on that when we come to the annual report, in terms of how do we ensure that the voice of the under ones is heard and that we are best able to meet their needs. And the other board priority that we've got is child exploitation. Again, members might be familiar with child sexual exploitation, which we have worked on collectively as statutory partners for a number of years now. But we recognise that child exploitation is far wider than sexual exploitation. There are many children now who are criminally exploited. Members may be familiar with the terms such as county lines, where young children are used to traffic drugs on behalf of older people and adults. So they are criminally exploited. So our priority is about criminal exploitation in its widest sense. They are our current priorities, but you'll also see that when we talk through the annual report, though both of those priorities were carried forward from the last performance year as well, because we recognise when tackling such significant areas, it would be remiss of us to think that we can solve it in just 1 year. The priorities are shared with the Stoke Safeguarding Children's Board, recognising that these elements don't recognise boundaries and borders that we might recognise in terms of lines of responsibility. So membership of the board, currently board members for the council is Helen Riley as the Director for Families and Communities. Heather Johnson is the Executive Lead on behalf of the Clinical Commissioning Group. And board members might be aware that there are changes in the Clinical Commissioning Group that will be introduced next year as it becomes an integrated care system. We are still working through with colleagues what those changes will mean, but there will still be a health representative as a statutory requirement on the Children's Safeguarding Board. And the third member of the board currently is Jenny Mattison. She's the temporary ACC for Staffordshire Police, and she joined the board in September. And those are the key members of the statutory partners that sit on the board. The board structure then is supported by a number of subgroups. So we have the Scrutiny and Assurance Group. Their role is to look at the detail of progress against the priorities, to identify whether there are any challenges in achieving them, take progress reports from those that are involved in delivery, and they make decisions in terms of whether or not there are any blockages in the systems or whether matters need to be escalated to the board for resolution at that strategic statutory partner level. Beneath the Scrutiny and Assurance Group, we have 3 further subgroups. The Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel. So these panel are charged at looking at specific incidents that have occurred within Staffordshire where a child has been significantly injured or has lost their life, and to look at the learning from a multi-agency perspective and then work out how that learning is shared across practitioners and how it is embedded practice. The Child Death Overview Panel has responsibility for reviewing any death of a child or young person under the age of 18 years, and we'll talk more about their work and the volume of that within the annual report. But essentially, it's a multi-agency panel which have to consider whether or not there were any opportunities to prevent the death of that child or young person. You will appreciate that some of those deaths are expected because children have underlying health conditions, but the panel also considers those where a child death was not expected, and looks at the circumstances and how that might be prevented in the future. We also in Staffordshire have a review of restraints task group. This focuses on the Wellington Young Offenders Institute, which sits within our geographical location. And that group is looking at the restraint of children within that facility. As we recognise, there are on occasions need for children to be restrained within that facility. It is not the preferred option, and it is the duty of that panel and the wider safeguarding group to assure ourselves that the children are being treated in a safe and appropriate manner. So the restraints task group will consider every restraint that has been undertaken and will review CCTV footage so that we can assure ourselves that techniques are being appropriately used and that the minimal amount of force is being used on children within that Wellington facility. The board also has a learning in practice forum. This is where we take learning from reports that have been identified and we work out with the best method in which that is shared with practitioners in the county. So the Staffordshire safeguarding arrangements are set out for you on the board there. I won't go through all of these, but as you've seen, the responsibility is about safeguarding children and making sure that their welfare is protected. And this is achieved by partners working in collaboration, sharing information at the earliest opportunity, and making sure that the sharing of information is then effective in the what happens next and the plan to mitigate risk. It's based on early identification of risk. Members may be aware of the term early help, and the term earliest help means identifying children at that very initial stage where there is any concern at all that a child may be at risk of harm, and putting an intervention in place for their families so that that risk doesn't come to fruition. And we work to embed learning across agencies, and we work with multi-agencies, both in terms of statutory agencies, but also in terms of third sector, voluntary agencies, schools, etc., are all part of the wider network through which we share learning and gather information. The references on the back point you in the direction of further information in terms of working together, the multi-agency arrangements for safeguarding, the legislation and our new board arrangements. And I'd invite members to have a look at the Safeguarding Children's Board website, where you can find a whole host of information about the activities of the board, its fundamental principles, and there's always a newsletter on there that keeps you up to date in terms of safeguarding developments and new work streams that are coming online. Also recognising that a number of members of this panel are new to post, we will be identifying dates for training sessions for council members over the coming months into the new year now. We will identify a number of different dates for training opportunities, so we would extend invites to you to attend that if you find it beneficial to get a greater understanding in terms of the work of the Safeguarding Board. So I will just take a moment to pause before I move on to annual report, just if there's any questions in terms of board arrangements.
Yes, thank you. That was really helpful. Councillor Eaglin.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of questions, please. First and foremost, I didn't hear on your announcement of the board that there was any elected member from the public on it. I wondered why this wasn't, because we, the elected people, are the first people that learn about these children that are in a distressed state. I wondered why this wasn't included. Maybe I'm not suggesting a member of the panel from the Staffordshire County Council, but certainly the cabinet member who's got a vast experience about these things, far more than that we get to hear about. But we are on the first stage of any public that want to have any information on it. And this, well, that's if you could answer that for me, then I'll come back. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So Councillor Sutton is the elected member that sits on the Safeguarding Board, and perhaps remiss of me not to mention him in the presentation. So he's the elected member. In terms of the public voice on the Safeguarding Board, the Safeguarding Board is a statutory agency board under legislation, which is why we don't have a public figure on it. But what the board does do is it receives information that is very much gathered from members of the public, from families and communities that we work with, and that information is shared with the board. So we do get to hear from public, families and young people within the county in terms of their experiences of services offered by statutory agencies, and we have a good communications method with children and young people, particularly through The Voice, which is a communication network specifically with children and young people in the county.
Will we have an opportunity to have these people come back again? Because it's a new thing that's kicking off, and I just would like to keep a watchful eye on it, because I'd like, if anything happened to anybody I knew of that was in a distressed state, I would like to know how it follows through. So if you don't mind, Chairman, if we could put this on our future programme, I would be very grateful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think we have an annual report anyway, and I think if members had concerns, I think there's the apparatus to work through that. So I'll ensure that that's done. Sorry, I think Councillor Sutton was next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly. So there has been a Children's Safeguarding Board in some variety for some considerable time. It's just that there's been some new arrangements and turned into a partnership. Previously, there were a lot more members of the board. The Wood report that Sue referred to had a little look at that and decided that the rationale was far too broad, basically to be able to be effective. So that's when it was reduced to the 3 partners. So I do sit on the board really as an observer. I don't have a vote because it's tripartite between three bodies, and that would put an unfair advantage towards the local authority, so to speak. But just to be clear, the board is not operational in the sense we're dealing with operational matters. They're looking to see what that safeguarding through all the partners and through other partners throughout the whole of Staffordshire is something that is being adhered to.
No, thank you for that. Councillor Pedesci, are you waiting, or can you turn your microphone off if you're not?
Could I ask a question, please?
Well, I'll just come back to you in a second. I think Councillor Waring, was next.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. You just mentioned training to be offered to the panel. Can you just give me a few more details how that will be delivered? Will it be online, Teams? Is it modular? Can we tap into that at any time? Thank you.
So the details of the training is yet to be worked through. Because of COVID restrictions, we have moved to delivering online training for many of the training delivered to frontline practitioners and managers. So I'm sure there will be an online option if that's preferred. But as I say, we intend to deliver more than one session, so I'm sure we can accommodate both face-to-face and online training if there's a preference for both.
Thank you. Does that answer the question? Councillor Pedesci.
Thank you, Chair. 3 very quick points, Chair. First of all, I'd like some reassurance that everything possible was done for face-to-face opportunities to visit or monitor any children that we knew who were at risk of harm during lockdown. The fact that some face-to-face opportunities were cancelled or delayed due to lack of PPE is quite appalling and unforgivable. Can I ask as well, please, on page 5 of the report, just so that I've read this right, it says in the bottom corner, local authority early help services were suspended to new referrals, but at the top of the next page it says that there was an overall reduction in referrals due to the increase in early help activity. So it just seemed like a contradiction there. And finally, Chair, just generally there is discussion in this paper about child exploitation, how to spot the signs of child exploitation, knife crime, etc. And it also says that one of the key trigger points for significant escalation of risk and serious harm is children being excluded from school. So it seems to me, in some ways, that we're concentrating more on the effects and the symptoms rather than the root causes. In my opinion, we're excluding far too many children from school, and I believe we need to look into the reasons as to why that is, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sue, did you want to add anything?
Chair, I'm more than happy to answer those questions now, or would you rather I answer them as we go through the annual report and perhaps provide more context?
That might be a more appropriate place to do it. Oh, sorry, I can't see. I think Helen has an electronic hand up. Helen?
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I was going to respond to offer to respond to the questions raised, but obviously it's on the next item, so I didn't know how you wanted to play it. But I'll wait till Sue's finished, and we'll see if the questions still need responding to then.
Yes, thank you. I think that might be the appropriate way forward. Can I just ask a question as well? I think without wanting to rehearse the reasons why prior to 2020 we had a joint board, and then we've now presumably gone back to independent boards between ourselves and Stoke-on-Trent. I'm pretty sure, well, I haven't seen a report to that nature, but I'm sure there would have been a report probably presented in this very chamber, wouldn't there, extolling the virtues of joint working together, sharing expertise and training, the efficiencies that are gained by pulling all of these things together. And I assume that in that report we would have made a strong, compelling argument to go to a joint board. And I accept that the reason for the split might not be within our control, but has that not put us then in a position where we've now reverted back to, in effect, a suboptimal model, where we would have made strong arguments about doing things together, and now we find ourselves back to where we were? And one of the themes that runs through the report seems to suggest that because we are now where we are, we're not 100% sure about how it's going to work, and there are promises about reviews in the future. But has it not put us really in on a backward step? So actually now we're at this, I want a better phrase, this suboptimal operating model that we made strong arguments against previously, and now we're also, as a consequence of that, in a position where we're not completely understanding all of the issues.
So Chair, yes, I'm happy to answer that, but Helen may wish to come in as well. So essentially, when the Wood report was published in 2018, there was indeed a move to have a joint board for the county of Staffordshire. And for all of the reasons, I guess, Chair, that you've identified, it was felt at that time that there was an optimum operating model in bringing everybody together. However, the experience showed that by bringing everybody together, whilst everybody was very much committed and working towards joint priorities and safeguarding children throughout the county of Staffordshire, there was a risk that the business of one side, either Staffordshire or Stoke, might overshadow the needs of the other half of the arrangement, if you like. And so it was felt that to ensure that children in Staffordshire were adequately safeguarded, and we could give absolute focus to the children in Staffordshire rather than trying to combine the two areas, it was felt that a move to separate boards would better suit that purpose. What's really key to remember is that we are absolutely linked in terms of joint priorities. So although we have separate reporting mechanisms and separate structures now, we work to ensuring that children within Staffordshire County as a whole are safeguarded and their best interest and their welfare is met. So we do work to similar agendas, we have shared priorities, we have great connectivity with the board in Stoke, but it was felt that to ensure that we didn't get diverted in terms of our focus too far away from Staffordshire, that a separate board better met that purpose. And I'll pause there because I think Helen may wish to come in.
Yes, thank you for that. I suppose really though, one of the issues for me is that, and again, I just made the point, but we must have made a compelling argument that this was the right way forward, and now we've moved back from that position. I assume that we would have made some infrastructure changes as well about how the service is delivered because of that change. Is there any current piece of work around assessing the impact or the consequences of where we find ourselves now? And I accept it's not of our own making, but we talk a lot about putting the child first, hearing the voice, doing all of those things. But we had, to a degree, put all of our eggs in one basket that now we don't seem to be able to operate in that manner. I think Helen is wanting to come in as well, so I'll bring Helen in first, if that's okay. Helen, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. So you're absolutely correct, Chair. We did put together what I thought at the time was a very strong argument for bringing the two boards together. That was supported at the time by our partners that have a whole county footprint. So in terms of the police and health colleagues, were certainly very supportive of that. And we spent 2 or 3 years working. It was quite difficult working to bring the boards together, and we were pilot. They weren't called pilots, but that's what they were. An early implementer as a joint board for the Wood Review. And really, what happened next was is a consequence of timing, really, because just as the two boards came together, the City of Stoke-on-Trent's children's inspection took place, and as I'm sure as every member knows, the City of Stoke-on-Trent Children's Services at that time were found to be inadequate. So as a natural consequence of that, when the two boards came together, as you would expect, an awful lot of time, rightly so, and effort, rightly so, was ensuring that the arrangements across the partnership for Stoke particularly were put in place to ensure that services moved forward and that children were safe in Stoke. And so I guess 80 or 90% of the time was spent talking about Stoke issues. Around that time, there were some changes at the City Council in terms of a new Director of Children's Services, a new Cabinet member, and the very strong view that then emerged from Stoke was, while they still, in principle, supported, I suppose, the original argument around a joint board, they felt that because of the situation they found themselves in, that they needed a board specifically for Stoke to really focus on improvement. And, you know, speaking very honestly, I found that at the time, after the 2 or 3 years work that I know some of us had put into bringing a joint board together, a disappointment. But as Sue said, it did also present an opportunity to alleviate some of my and others emerging concerns that time for the next 2 or 3 years would potentially be dominated by making sure arrangements were strong in Stoke. So we had some very grown-up discussions around that, and the agreement was made to separate the two boards. Having said that, we still have maintained shared priorities and have some joint working groups around that, particularly focusing on issues which do cross borders. And those relationships are strong across the two partnerships. Both partnerships appointed an independent chair. Sue started in May, as she said, and Stoke also have an independent chair. And I know that Sue and Stoke's independent chair meet and have met to ensure those linkages. So it is down really to both boards to maintain that relationship. And we do have, as I say, partners that sit on the Staffordshire board are the same individuals that sit on the Stoke board, and so that that relationship is established. In terms of, I suppose, support to the board, we'd never got to the point where we had actually finalised the administrative and officer arrangements. So for the Staffordshire board, in going alone, I suppose, once we'd been a joint board, there hasn't been any extra expense because actually all the staff were employed by Staffordshire at the time and still continue to do so. Stoke have had to put in place their own administrative support arrangements, obviously at cost to them. But there is no doubt that obviously if we'd have had a joint board, there would have been a single team and there would have been some principally some staffing savings around the support for the two. But I would like to reinforce Sue's points that the two boards do work very closely together. I know that at the time that the separation happened, neither board ruled out the fact that we may come together in the future, but it was just the circumstances at the time led to the conclusion that that two boards, at least for the next couple of years, was the optimum solution.
Yes, thank you. I suppose I go back to the point, though, that we have made a strong argument about bringing the boards together for all the usual reasons around efficiencies, but we now find ourselves adopting a position that we argued against not so many years ago. I suppose the question really, until we know how well this is working, I accept all the points that you've made about the two boards working together, but can we be reassured then that the way that safeguarding is delivered here in Staffordshire is as good as it can be? I assume the answer is going to be yes, of course.
Joe, if I might come in on that, the Safeguarding Board, both here in Staffordshire and in Stoke, has absolute responsibility for assuring itself that children within the county are safe. And therefore, in answer to your question, yes, I am assured as the independent chair that safeguarding within the county is as safe as we can make it. That said, there is always learning to be taken, and as when we go through the details of the annual report, we will continue to seek and take learning and embed it to improve our practice. But I am assured, and through my conversations with the independent chair within Stoke, who holds the same responsibility as I do alongside the statutory partners, I think he would sit here and make the same comment to you.
Okay. Yes, thank you for that. Councillor Leegland, did you indicate?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In the past, before we went to these two different joint boards, I've been sitting on this panel, the children's panel, for many years now, and every year, we this panel, this committee, and our officers went through a test. We have people come along, and they question us, the elected members, as well as the officers, and they're judged, and we're judged on what quality and what range we are in. And some of the members here was on that committee with me. I'd like to know, is this new committee, Helen, is this new board rather, is this going to sit in the same way? Are they going to be looked at and judged by an independent people, or are you going to judge yourselves?
Sue or Alan, could you?
Yes.
I'm not. Oh, you go, Sue. Sorry.
In terms of being judged, my responsibility as the independent chair is to assure myself that the statutory partners who have a duty to deliver safeguarding within Staffordshire are delivering that on that duty. That is my responsibility. And therefore, in terms of judging, I have the responsibility for assuring that that work is being done. The way then that we share progress of the board externally is through processes such as this, where we present an annual report to members for their scrutiny, questioning and approval, ultimately before it is sent to a national child safeguarding practice review panel who have responsibility for reviewing the annual reports of all safeguarding boards within England and Wales, and they have responsibility for looking at the detail of what is being provided. If they have any concerns around it, then they would certainly come back to us. And all of that process sits alongside statutory inspections such as Ofsted inspections, HMIC inspections for the police and other inspections within health, all of which on occasion will have a safeguarding lens. So in terms of being judged, I think it's fair to say that we don't judge our own homework. I have responsibility to assure that safeguarding business is being delivered by partners, but we are critiqued on the quality of what we are delivering in Staffordshire by a number of external partners, you know, through single agencies and also through multi-agency.
Well, thank you for that. Helen, I think you wanted to add something.
I just wanted to add that up until a few years ago, safeguarding boards were inspected separately by Ofsted, and I think that's perhaps what Councillor Eagland is recalling. As part of their official inspection framework, they no longer do that. So their Staffordshire safeguarding boards, when we had our last inspection, was one of the few in the country that were rated as good by Ofsted. However, that inspection no longer exists as a separate entity, and as Sue indicates, is a look at how the safeguarding board operates is incorporated into the wider inspection of children's services or any focus if it's from Ofsted, but there isn't a separate grading for the board itself anymore.
Okay, thank you for that.
Can I just come back?
Yeah, please do.
The only judgment on this board that we've just heard about is the chairman. Is she responsible, Helen, for what goes on? She just said that she is responsible to all of us in answering these questions, or is she responsible to the people like you who are official officers?
No, she's responsible for to the people and children of Staffordshire for ensuring that the board is operating in the way that it should. Sue is an independent chair. Sue doesn't have any control from me or any other of the statutory partners. That's why we have an independent. She is independent of the three statutory partners who were charged to deliver the safeguarding board's responsibility. And part of Sue's job is to make annually and more frequently that judgment and to hold partners to account when she feels that we are failing in our, or we need to improve in the way that we are safeguarding children collectively. That is the point of an independent chair.
Well, that sounds okay, Chair, but I hope this system doesn't let any child fall through the net because of the lack of information that comes forward from this committee to the board. Thank you.
Yes, okay, I think we've probably done that now. Can we move on with the rest of the report?
Yes, happy to move on, Chair. Thank you. So if we can move on then to the annual report of Staffordshire Safeguarding Children's Board. This is the annual report for the period April 2020 to March 21. There is a requirement, as I've mentioned, for each safeguarding board to provide an annual report that has to go to the national panel. And just to give members oversight of how this process has evolved since the Wood report as well. Previously, safeguarding boards, which have existed since 2008 in one format or another, were responsible for submitting a report of what activity had been completed during the year that was being reported upon. The focus of these reports now is much more moving away from description of activity and trying to focus on the impact of that activity. So what difference did that activity make? So this report in the format that you see today is the first in iteration of that journey here in Staffordshire, where we are moving into a more impact-focused report. But it's fair to say that it's an evolving journey. We are getting direction each year from the national panel in terms of how reports nationally can be improved. And so I'm absolutely sure that when I sit here in 12 months' time, the report format that you see may be different to the one that occurs in the future. That's not a reflection in any way that this year's report is ineffective or isn't fit for the purpose of which it's intended, but it is a sign of learning being taken in all areas of safeguarding, as we've already described. And that will also translate into the format of this report and how it is presented back to you. So that's an overview of the report and why we do it. So recognising that members have had opportunity to look at the report, you'll be delighted to know, I'm sure, that I don't intend to go through it paragraph by paragraph, but I will pull out highlights of key information and then happy, as always, to take questions as members have them. So we've covered the changes in the board arrangements and have had that discussion. The big factor that has already been identified and has been raised as a valuable question was the impact of COVID-19 on children and young people in Staffordshire. And it's fair to reflect that children and young people in Staffordshire were no different to children and young people in the rest of the UK, in terms of there were changes in the services that they received, and they received services in a different way to they had previously experienced. And that did bring challenges. It brought challenges in terms of face-to-face contacts were reduced, where practitioners would have seen children and young people in a variety of settings where safeguarding could be spotted, risks identified. Some of those opportunities were taken away for very obvious reasons that I'm sure members will understand. That said, work was undertaken in Staffordshire to ensure that those children that were identified as the most at risk were given the opportunity of having face-to-face consultations and meetings. And so where we were able to facilitate face-to-face and where there was clear evidence that children were vulnerable or had child in need plans, for example, they were prioritised so that we were able to safeguard those most at risk in the most effective way that we could, acknowledging that there were limitations in terms of what could be delivered during that period. And so, as you all have seen in the report, there was professional concern about the reduced offer around face-to-face, and that really is repeating, I guess, some of the concerns that have been mentioned here today, that we recognise that when we don't see children face-to-face, there is a greater risk that some of the initial signs are of neglect or other concerns may not be as readily identified as if they were face-to-face. But we did work across the partnership in terms of bringing together a COVID-19 subgroup to identify how statutory partners were going to minimise risk to children and young people during the COVID lockdowns. So in terms of early help provision and referrals, and I'll pick up the point here, if I may, that was previously raised. So overall, in the reporting period, we saw an increase in referrals into early help. That is a really positive step because early help is designed to identify the start of risk being identified rather than waiting until that risk becomes critical and we then have to move in terms of statutory services becoming involved. So early help referrals and increasing them signifies to us that agencies across all levels who are working with children and families are more adept now at spotting the earliest signs of concern involving children and young people. So we welcome an increase in referrals because it recognises that training and investment that we have made in training around early help is becoming embedded practice. And the point in the document is that we saw an increased level of early help referrals despite the fact that there was a period of time when new early help referrals couldn't have been received. So if we had taken out of that COVID restriction, we would have seen an even greater volume of early help referrals into the system in the last reporting year. We recognise that COVID-19 created additional concerns and challenges for those with babies and infants. Some of those facilities that I think we have all taken for granted, such as partners being allowed to be present at the birth of their child, had to be suspended during COVID. And we recognise that that brought significant emotional trauma on both parents and their families at that very special time, and brought a different experience than perhaps any of them could have anticipated as they began on their pregnancy journey. What was put in place there, you will have read, is the Maternity Voices Partnerships. This is where we had champions who worked within our maternity units and provided a conduit between service users and their families, so that we tried to overcome that gap as best we could and make sure that very new mothers were supported on their journey into parenthood. And you all have seen that we had very positive feedback there in terms of the COVID Facebook page that was set up, providing information to parents at that critical time. We recognise that there was an impact on education and well-being, and again, you will have seen, I'm absolutely sure, in terms of the impact on young people and their families of the loss of education, which was significant during that lockdown period, and the challenges particularly for families who didn't have ready access to online training because they didn't have laptops or mobile phone devices. And we recognise that children here in the county were affected by that as much as anywhere else in the country. You'll have seen there in terms of the impact recorded in the report on children and young people. So we've done a lot of work to try and understand the impact, listening to the voice of those that were affected because they couldn't go into school. And it's as identifies there, 58 of young people in Staffordshire said they struggled to stay engaged with learning during the lockdown period, and 62% of their parents struggled to keep children engaged with learning. Only 14% of children found that homeschooling was a positive outcome for them. And whilst those figures are concerning, they are not out of line with the rest of the country. And we know that a lot of work has been undertaken by schools in preparing for children being out of school. And I think that has been an improved position, certainly into this current reporting year. We recognise the impact from domestic abuse on families, and you will have heard during the media reporting a significant increase in domestic abuse during the reporting period. So whilst we were cocooning people in their houses, we recognise that for a significant number of children and adults, home is not a safe environment for them, and we recognise the risk that that brings. And again, in terms of mitigating those risks, there is a comprehensive programme of risk management of domestic violence offenders that is put into place by policing across the county, and so some of those measures would have been taken to try and mitigate that risk, but it was one that was recognised as a result of the COVID pandemic. And from a board point of view, impact on training and development has already been mentioned this morning. Up until the COVID lockdown, all of our safeguarding training in the county was delivered on a face-to-face basis. It was necessary to suspend the training programme from April 2020, whilst colleagues worked really hard in changing face-to-face training into an online delivery. I have to share with colleagues that that has been extremely successful. And we have been delivering through an online platform since September 2020, with a significant number of practitioners trained. Just over 2,500 practitioners have been trained via the online platform between September 2020 and March 2021. So a significant volume with representation from all of the statutory agencies, as well as schools and voluntary agencies being able to access that. And we recognise the impact on the judicial services, both from criminal proceedings and the young people and their families that are affected by delays within those proceedings, right through to children's services, regular business in terms of adoptions, law cases, in terms of moving children from that looked after space into a more stable background through permanent adoption proceedings. So a significant impact on children and their families in Staffordshire as there were nationwide. My reassurance to members is that statutory partners recognised the risk areas and worked exceptionally hard in a multi-agency space to mitigate the risks and ensure that children and their families were supported through a really difficult time during the lockdown period. So we will continue as we move into this reporting year, into 2021, to monitor the impact of COVID-19 and to ensure that children and families are supported in the best way that we can, taking the learning from the previous lockdowns and what has worked well for us in Staffordshire and nationally, and translating that into practice that we offer here in the county. I'm going to move on then, if I may, just to give you an overview in terms of the priorities that were worked on by the board in the reporting period of last year. So neglect was one of our priorities. It was, as has been mentioned, a joint priority with the Stoke Safeguarding Children's Board. And we recognise the importance of neglect as a priority because it still remains the largest category of abuse subject to a child protection plan. At the end of March 21, neglect featured in 65% of child protection plans here in Staffordshire. So we recognise that neglect and the impact of neglect is significant for children and their families. We undertook a multi-agency analysis of agency reviews to look at the impact of neglect, and very much at the heart of that was trying to capture the lived experiences. We know that children who live in households where neglect is evident can go on to have significantly lower life opportunities in a whole manner of ways, from their mental and physical health through to their educational achievements, through to worklessness as adults. And so tackling neglect and identifying and putting in a support plan at the earliest opportunity is a real must, and it's one that we have committed to last year, and we've continued it as a priority for the coming years. In terms of some of the work that was undertaken around neglect, we introduced an early years delivery plan, staying safe section. This is a tangible example of how we're working together across all partners. In the staying safe section, partners are committed to detailing and documenting the activities that have been agreed that will positively contribute to under ones. Under ones are a particularly at-risk group because we can't hear the voice of the child if they're under one for obvious reasons. So we have to look at other ways in which we ensure that those that are victims of neglect as an under one, how we recognise that, how practitioners recognise it, and how we support that. And that staying safe section was a real demonstration of the commitment across the partnership to doing that. Development of multi-agents guidance for neglect, so ensuring that our frontline practitioners and their managers at all levels understand neglect and the impact of neglect in the ways that I've just provided an overview of is really key. And we worked hard on that multi-agency training platform to deliver training on neglect and how to spot the signs of it. We also embedded in the county the graded care profile. So this was a tool that allows practitioners to provide an objective measure of the care of children. And what we ask practitioners to do when they complete this assessment is to look at four broad headings under which there are a number of subsections. But the headings that we ask practitioners to consider is the physical care offered to children, the safety, the love, and the esteem of that child, because we recognise that esteem of a young person is critical as those other factors in terms of physical and safety and the love that is offered to them. Building a child's esteem in those young formative years is absolutely key in giving them the best opportunities moving forward. So the graded care profile gives practitioners a tool against which they can judge each of those areas and then make a determination in whether or not there is a risk around neglect in that household, and to put into place then a better care package and support package to mitigate any risk that has been identified. As I've said, that priority of neglect continues into the current performance year. And we recognise the importance of that because we have undertaken a number of rapid reviews. These are where practitioners come together where a child has been significantly injured or killed, which have involved children under the age of 1. And we have taken learning from them, but we recognise there is still learning to be embedded across practitioners to make sure that the voice of those child in the very young age group are better met and better heard, and that they are given and their families are given the best support for that. Hence that priority has been carried forward into the current performance year, and members will hear a report on our progress at this time next year, I'm sure. Our second priority, which again is shared with Stoke, is child exploitation. As I've mentioned, this recognises all sorts of child exploitation, not just sexual exploitation, which has been a previous focus of safeguarding boards. And has been recognised by one of the members already. We know that exclusion from mainstream school is an absolute trigger and exacerbates risks of young people being exploited criminally or through sexual exploitation. And we are working hard in terms of monitoring exclusions. I'm sure Helen will can provide detail if it's needed on the exclusion schools panel that is in operation, so that children who are excluded are very much scrutinised, and the circumstances are scrutinised. We also in the county have two safeguarding officers that work with our schools who are very much focused on the impact of exclusions and work very hard with schools to find an alternative solution to exclusions, recognising the impact that that can have. And that's a real positive step for Staffordshire because other local authorities don't have that embedded school safeguarding support. So in terms of raising awareness of child exploitation, we have a joint child exploitation task group which was set up in 2019-2020, and that continues to lead on the priorities for the board, delivering against the business of protecting children from exploitation. We also delivered a conference of which there were 257 attendees from statutory agencies, but attendees were also invited from schools and third sector agencies, and that was about spotting and understanding the signs of child exploitation and working and hearing with those who are involved and have a lived exploitation of exploitation. We encourage people to be professionally curious, to consider all areas of indicators of child exploitation, which can include children going missing from home and the underlying reasons for that. We also take learning from national reports in terms of child exploitation. So the national panel published last year a report entitled "It Was Hard to Escape," which looks at exploitation and the experience of children and young people who are exploited. And that brought out a number of key risks. It identified the risk of exclusion, as we've identified. It's highlighted that children where vulnerability has been identified in the household are not only the children that are at risk of exploitation, and we must make sure that we are all aware of that. It highlights that trusted relationships for young people are important. Those trusted relationships that provide stability and safe place are really key to sheltering young people from the risk of exploitation. That report talked about critical moments, so those opportunities that are evident where young people can be spoken to in a safe way by statutory agencies. For example, when children come into accident and emergency facilities, there is an opportunity for trusted members to speak to them and offer support and try and hear the voice of those young people. The same as when young people come into custody, there's also opportunities for us to try and have a critical moment where we offer help and support to them. And the report also identified the risk that I think we recognise, that said criminal exploitation is a greater risk depending on your gender and your ethnicity. So young people from minority ethnic groups are at greater risk of exploitation, and boys are at greater risk of criminal exploitation. And again, it's important that we take that learning and we ensure that our practitioners recognise it and put it into play when they are looking at identification. So we have a Tackling Child Exploitation Support Programme. This works on a 4P approach, which those of you familiar with strands around counter-terrorism may have heard previously. So the 4 strands are preparing, preventing, protecting and pursuing those that are responsible for exploitation. And we've had success in the year in terms of county lines. This is, as I've mentioned previously, where young people are rewarded financially or through other means by those who are adults to traffic drugs to other parts of the country. The theory being that if you are a juvenile caught with a amount of illegal drugs, then the statutory response will be more lenient on you. Certainly we would not seek to criminalise young people if it can at all be avoided. So young people are being trafficked across the UK. Young people from Staffordshire are being trafficked across the UK, and Staffordshire receives young people from other areas of the country who come here to deal and in illicit drugs. So we recognise that is an issue for us, and again we work hard to support those young people and their families through a whole host of ways to better protect them. A number of operations were undertaken by Staffordshire Police during the year and through joint partners to help parents identify and spot the signs that their child may be at risk of illegal trafficking. We also did a number of activities reducing knife crime, which we know is linked in with criminal exploitation. So during the reporting period, there were Operation Sceptre took place in November of last year. During that time, there were 154 knife recoveries or seizures. There were 4 knife crime-related arrests. There were multi-agency engagements in 10 hotspots. These are hotspots that have been identified through data where young people and knife crime may be linked, and there was engagement through police and other agencies with those young people in terms of prevention and deterring them from that risk. And there were 35 targeted visits by social workers in the county to those young people already identified as a risk of criminal exploitation. As a result of Operation Sceptre and other work that was going on during the performance year 2021, 40 offenders who were under the age of 18 were charged or cautioned or had community sentences on the basis of knife crime offences. As members will have seen, we've got a number of multi-agency child exploitation panels across the county which have discussed 420 people, where information is shared about the risk that has been identified and a support package is put into those families and their communities to better support people, as well as another host of activity that you will have seen documented in the report on page 16. We also have a violence reduction unit here in terms of focusing on the risk of children of criminal exploitation, and there's a number of multi-agency operations that have been run supporting those 4 principles of prepare, prevent, protect and pursue. And again, it remains a focus for us here in Staffordshire and in Stoke for the coming 12-month period, and is a priority that the board and statutory partners are working hard to ensure is being delivered effectively. I'll move on now, if I may, to subgroups. We touched on this in the earlier presentation in terms of the 4 subgroups that we have that work underneath the board. Firstly, the Scrutiny and Assurance Group. It's a multi-agency group where it brings together key partners who provide assurance that safeguarding is being delivered through a number of strands. They have a work plan that is designed to support the priorities of the board for the year. And when the board meet at the scrutiny and assurance level, they track progress against the work detail that has been set for statutory agencies, and that's RAG status. The Safeguarding Board then receives, when we meet, progress of that work plan, and we can identify areas that have been RAG rated as red, which means that there is blockage in the system, and it's our responsibility then at the Safeguarding Board level to try and seek ways through which blockages can be resolved, so that those work plans can be delivered during the timescale that we have set ourselves. And as mentioned, we strive to monitor the impact and outcomes much more clearly in the focus for 21-22, so that we actually can be assured of the so what. So what is the impact of all of the work that is being delivered? How does it look and feel differently for children, young people and their families here in Staffordshire? We have a child safeguarding practice review. So as I've mentioned, where we have a child who dies or is significantly harmed, partners will come together to share information. There is a strict timescale in which this has to happen. So we have to notify to the national panel that a child has been injured or significantly harmed within 5 days of that event coming to the notice of statutory partners. And then a multi-agency rapid review meeting must take place within 15 days of that notification taking place. And in that 15 days, partners have the opportunity to look at all of the interactions they've had with that child and their families, and then bring it together to share information. One of the key parts of the rapid review process is that single agencies are asked to identify missed opportunities and learning in their interactions with the child or the young person before they come to the rapid review meeting, because the focus of it about is receiving information but looking at learning opportunities so that we can prevent similar events happening in the future. The rapid review meeting itself also brings an opportunity for challenges. So the chair and other agencies there will also scrutinise the responses that were put into place by each single agency, and again as a collective look at opportunities in terms of prevention. We share rapid reviews with the national panel, and on an annual basis, learning from national reviews nationally are shared so that we are able to learn from others' experiences. During the reporting period 2021, we held 5 rapid reviews. 3 were for Staffordshire children and 2 were for Stoke-on-Trent children. In the reporting year prior, we held 7 rapid reviews, so 5 feels about the average for the previous 2 years. There were also 3 serious case reviews or safeguarding practice reviews. So a safeguarding practice review is the opportunity, if in a rapid review it's felt that some of the learning is more significant and requires more understanding and investigation, then the rapid review can recommend that we hold a local child safeguarding practice review that allows us just to examine that case in more detail so that we can take a greater level of learning and respond to it in that way. Key themes that were identified from the reviews last year were around neglect, physical harm to babies under 1, as I've mentioned, and intrafamilial child sexual abuse were recurring themes through those rapid reviews that took place last year. The Child Death Overview Panel reports on the death of all children and young people under 18 years, as I've mentioned, in the county. And again, during the reporting period, we had 69 notification of child deaths, with including neonatal deaths, which is deaths within 28 days of life. And neonatal deaths accounted to 57% of the overall total. Of the notifications that we received in the reporting period, 18 of those were categorised as an unexpected death. As I mentioned earlier, some deaths are tragically expected because children are born with a life-limiting condition, but 18 of them in the last reporting period were not expected. I draw your attention to suicide deaths. They were reduced last year. We just had one suicide death, which was tragic during 2021. That was a reduction on the previous year where we saw 4 suicides of young people in the county. But I just draw to members' attention that tragically already in this reporting year, so since April 2021, we have already tragically lost 5 young people to suicide within Staffordshire. And again, when we reflect back on the experiences of young people during COVID and the impact on mental health of both children and adults during COVID, I think we are already seeing that one of the tragic consequences of that period may be the mental health impact and that increased volume of suicides that we have already seen during this current year. Of the 65 deaths that were considered, 15 of them were considered to have modifiable factors. These will not be new to members. They are factors that tragically we continue to hear, and they relate to smoking, non-attendance for healthcare appointments, alcohol and drug use by parents or carers, or mental health issues for the parent and carer of those children. So they are recurring themes. They are themes that feature very much in our training of practitioners working with young people and their families, and we recognise the ongoing challenge from an increased demand from mental health services, particularly for children and young people. We have, as mentioned, the subgroup for Wellington Young Offenders Institute. Again, one of the impact of COVID last year was for a period of time it was necessary to suspend the normal practice. So normally our this restraint group would go into the facility regularly and check on the welfare of young people. That had to be curtailed during the period of the lockdown, although for reassurance there were strong virtual maintaining of connections with the facility and with young people under the care of Staffordshire local authority. When the group comes together, we look at restraints. Our aim is to monitor all of these restraints and to ensure that our children are given the best care and support whilst they are in that facility. Over the page you will see our commitment of the group has been to reducing the use of pain-inducing techniques. These are a last resort and are only employed where there is a risk that there is a fear of serious injury or death to another child in that facility, and only in those circumstances can pain-inducing techniques be used. They are scrutinised in detail by the panel to make sure that they were used appropriately in appropriate circumstances, and that training techniques were followed as they should be, and the minimum amount of pain should have been caused to those children. There is an increasing use of body-worn camera footage within Wellington, which is helpful and helps us to review that alongside CCTV footage of the facility, and we listen to the voice of young people within the facility to hear what they're saying. We are aware at the board at this moment in time that COVID has had an impact within Wellington. It's one of the risks that has been identified by the board currently in terms of an increased level of violence within Wellington facility. And we are working hard both from the safeguarding board here to seek assurance in terms of what steps are being put in place. We recently invited the Governor and the safeguarding lead at Wellington to our safeguarding meeting in October. They came to board to give us an account of the situation in Wellington and what steps were being put in place. And we know that they have suffered from the impact of COVID. They've had significant numbers of staff reductions and absences, which has led to an increased amount of time that the boys within Wellington are being locked into their rooms, which we know increases levels of boredom, increases baiting and interaction between boys, and then when they are released has led to an increase in violence incidents within that facility. So to give reassurance to members, we are aware of that. We're also working with our safeguarding board partners in Wolverhampton, because they have young people from Wolverhampton who are in that facility as well. So I think to come back to the earlier point in terms of how can we give reassurance of the work of the board and our connectivity with others? We are very much connected at that safeguarding level to ensure that young people who are in Wellington are safe and as well cared for as they possibly can be. So that is a canter through the Safeguarding Annual Report. There are a list of references that gives further context in terms of the reporting processes and individual pieces of business that the board has reported on, should members wish to have any further information. Happy to take any questions, Chair, through yourself if members have them.
Sue, thank you very much. A very comprehensive run through the report. I think we would all very much welcome the report. It's incredibly detailed, as you've taken time to go through there. And I think we'd also welcome this increasing raising awareness, different sort of toolkits around and that improved sharing of information. And in particular, that sort of connectivity that you were talking about right at the end, I think is very reassuring. I suppose playing devil's advocate, really, we have been here before then. We have had many years of raising awareness, and we can all remember numerous tools that have been introduced to help professionals spot signs and make referrals. And that's not to say that we're not learning from that process and the tools that we now see benefit from perhaps some of the failures that we saw previously. However, one of the things that I didn't see in the report, and I think it was interesting when you talked about neglect in particular, and recognising the importance of low-level neglect. Some sort of frightening statistics there about the percentage that it plays in all of child exploitation. That must be very difficult to do, though, low level, because I suppose we're making those nuanced decisions, aren't we, about what is poor parenting and when does that move into low-level neglect. And also, interestingly, when you were talking about how do you hear the voice, although you can't hear the voice of the under ones, one of the criticisms that certainly, you've probably seen, but the state of policing reviews, which is something that's come out in the last 4 or 5 years, national reports that cover child protection and safeguarding. And a constant criticism within those reports is that the partnerships are failing to understand the big picture. They don't see, and what I would suggest is when it comes to low-level neglect and the plight of under ones who might be being abused, then there is a need, isn't there, for understanding that picture. There's a need for collating information, in particular intelligence. It seems like the report is very good on how we react to people who present those signs, but I just wonder whether, is there anything around that broader collating of intelligence? I know we have the multi-agency panels, but from my experience, whilst they're very good, they tend to be, again, reacting to a particular incident that's been referred to them. And I just feel that if we're going to pick up the cases of neglect, and unfortunately bear in mind that this county, this authority was criticised over a serious case review where it was found that low-level neglect played an important part. So it is something that I'm sure as members we all welcome. But I didn't see within this report just how we are going to use that intelligence, because I would suggest that finding particularly worrying low-level neglect and dealing with the abuse of under ones is about pulling together proactively intelligence of all the agencies. And of course the national reviews would tend to suggest that we don't do that particularly well. The other quick one as well on page 23, and what's referred to as the 4 Ps approach. You'll probably recognise that from the government's contest strategy around preventing exploitation of people in a terror setting. That's obviously been going for 20 years, and they've learnt a lot of lessons. One of the main lessons, though, around those 4P approaches, and I think it stood the test of time and it is the right way forward, is that at least there are plans around each of those four when it comes to safeguarding people from extremism. Do we have that same approach here? Will we have a prevent plan, a pursue plan, a protect plan? And importantly, do we have people who are driving those particular plans forward? Probably several questions there. I don't know if you can address those.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can pick up on the neglect point first. So there has been significant investment by statutory agencies and partner organisations and agencies over the last 4 or 5 years in understanding what was initially called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and a significant investment in training to frontline practitioners has been undertaken here in Staffordshire as elsewhere, that really hones into professionals that lifelong impact of childhood adversity. So key characteristics of children who live in childhood adversity include things such as children living in households where domestic violence is a feature, or where mental health of parents is a feature for them, or there's drug or alcohol abuse, where there is family separation, most often where parents are taken into custody, where there's worklessness, where there's financial issues. So we have become much more informed about the impact of that early life experience on the ability of a child and young person to go on and have the same opportunities as those that didn't live within those households suffering from those sorts of challenges. So I am confident that that level of training and awareness raising is out with frontline practitioners, and we are much more attuned at recognising those early indications, those households that we may go in for a multitude of different reasons. From a policing perspective, for example, we may go to respond to a call of reporting a burglary in a household, but the officers that will attend there will be dealing with the crime that has been reported, but will also have received training in looking at what is the conditions within this household. Are there children within it? Are the children in school when they should be? Is there food adequately evident within the house? What's the general conditions? And if there are concerns then referrals will be made in and shared with partners. So I think we've come a long way in recognising those impacts of neglect and their lifelong trauma that can result if not early identified and supported. That said, we recognise that the voice of the under ones is a challenge, and hearing is a challenge, and so in this performance year that we commissioned a thematic review, learning from 19 rapid reviews involving children under the age of 1. So a comprehensive piece of work was done to identify what was the learning from those reviews, and what did we need to do to improve. And some of the headlines from that was around children of this age are often invisible. How many times do practitioners go into households and not see the baby, because it's not within their single agency remit to see a child, but actually, what must be done to see and hear children of this age. What we found from the thematic reviews is when a child is of an age where they have no voice that they are able to share with us, then professionals revert to listening to what parents tell us. We know that tragically most children that are harmed in an interfamiliar setting are harmed by those parents or those that care for them. And so there is significant learning there for professionals to be more professionally curious, to hear what we are being told, but to seek opportunities to substantiate that through what we ourselves can see and hear and evidence around it. We also learned through that thematic review that we are focused on the needs of parents, but we don't also consider on every occasion the needs of the child. We also recognised that children are still bounced around the system. So they may enter as an early help, they may receive support the family case may be closed, then may become known to policing services because the children are becoming problematic in an antisocial behaviour way. They may come back into the system that way, and there hasn't always been that connectivity. So the investment that we've made in the thematic review is significant and allows us lots of opportunities in which we can continue to evolve and learn and share that learning with practitioners. So I'm confident we are making steps in that way. To address your point, Chair, if I may, in terms of the 4P plans, so we, under the Tackling Child Exploitation framework, there is a strategy and a work plan with organisations developing their own operational plans to tackle child exploitation. So there is a plan for each of the agencies. There are owners of those plans, and progress of those plans are brought together and shared through the multi-agency Tackling Exploitation group.
Yes, thank you. Helen, I think you were first.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to add some colour, I suppose, to some of Sue's responses there, if possible, but also to some of the questions that were asked prior to this this item coming, just to try and I guess address those fully as well, which is where I'll start. So there was a query around the lack of or the loss of as many face-to-face visits with children and families during lockdown, and Sue explained how we worked there in terms of a COVID subgroup across the partnership that was identifying those vulnerable children. But how it worked practically was that we had a list in Staffordshire of every vulnerable child that was known to our social services to send services. That list was compiled, involved many thousands of children, as you can imagine, was also shared with all our schools. So for children that were not in school, because you remember it was vulnerable children that were in school during the first lockdown and the children of key workers. For those children who were not in school and had not been seen within a period of a few days, those issues were shared across partners, and face-to-face visits were made to all vulnerable children to ensure that they were safe, that they had what they needed. So there was no child in Staffordshire that wasn't seen face-to-face. And that list was updated weekly, circulated across social workers, family practitioners, schools, and every child was either seen or visited. And that list was, assurance on that list was also provided to the DFE on a regular basis. In terms of early help, the question around the suspension of early help and then the rise in referrals, following national guidance when the first lockdown was introduced, we did very, very briefly suspend early help services and referrals because it's a non-statutory service, and we had to make sure if we were going to be short-staffed due to staff not being able to get to work because of children being at home, because of lockdown, or because they had COVID or were isolating, that those who were in receipt of statutory services, particularly child protection, were protected and safeguarded. As it panned out for Staffordshire, actually the impact on our staffing numbers were not as impactful, I guess, as we'd potentially thought they might be. So from memory, I think that suspension of early help referrals was only done for something like 2 or 3 weeks, because we reviewed the situation weekly and then we returned to full services, because as you're aware, early help is not a statutory service, although it is one of the most valuable services for the reasons Sue described around that early intervention and prevention. And it was, as Sue said, it's good news that the training and the relationships we'd got across partners meant that those referrals started to increase, because there were obviously concerns around families during the COVID period. In terms of the question or the statement around the delays for PPE, I have to say that was not at the County Council. There were no delays for our social workers or our family workers in accessing PPE. That was across the partnerships, just for clarity. And the point around exclusions being a symptom rather than root cause is well made and recognised. And I think Sue has explained the work that we have done and that we're doing around that with schools at the moment. We also have, in addition to what Sue mentioned, the Social Workers in Schools project, that we're part of a national pilot on, and that is proving really, really helpful to schools where they are experiencing some issues with young people, for that kind of professional intervention around strategies to remain inclusive and to keep those young people in schools. It's also a major thrust of our district inclusion hubs, where we bring teachers, head teachers and other professionals in a location together to discuss youngsters that are showing, starting to cause some concerns in schools. And we look at how collectively across the locality through the district inclusion hubs, those young people can remain in school, because it's quite clear there's very strong national evidence around what exclusions may lead to, the outcomes that may lead to for young people. In terms of the question on sharing information and spotting low-level neglect, in addition to what Sue said, I also wanted to draw members' attentions to the fact that we also have a comprehensive shared database called FIDO, which was the starting point for our Building Resilient Families and Communities model, the Troubled Families model as was, which are all those early indicators across all the partnership that families are experiencing difficulty and there is some concern around the family environment. Those indicators are shared across the partnership, and I'm sure you're aware we've worked with thousands and thousands of families through that programme and intervened as early as possible to try and spot any issues rolling on. And we also have our local discussions through the Earliest Help model, where any family which is causing any of the statutory or voluntary partners or schools concern locally, we have a virtual discussion around the family and what help can be put in, either through the Building Resilient Families and Communities programme or through a referral to early help around low-level neglect. So I hope that just adds a bit more flesh to the bones.
No, thank you for that. It's really helpful. Councillor Badeschi.
Thank you, Chair. Two very quick points. This may be an unfair criticism, but I generally felt through the report that I wanted to see more figures and statistics, partly to make sure that future monitoring is more clearly and effectively done. Secondly, Chair, particularly when it comes to schooling, the discussion has very much been around children who are in the system, so to speak. And I'm wondering if we as a council, maybe in collaboration with other councils, have a role to play in affecting legislation, so that we also have a responsibility to safeguard children who are in unregistered school settings and receiving home education. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. I think we already have the responsibility to do that. I think some of those things are challenging, of course, but I don't think it abrogates our responsibilities. Helen?
In terms of the elective home education point, we have invested in increasing the number of staff that we have working with those families over recent years, because as you're aware, I think particularly through COVID, we saw quite an increase in that. What I would say is that I have no legislative right to ask for access into a family's home that I've chosen to electively home educate, and there is a very well organised and articulate national pressure group that takes great offence actually at the suggestion that by choosing to electively home educate their children, they're presented a safeguarding risk. So we have that to deal with on one hand, but what we have done over the last 12 months, certainly since the rise in electively home educated children, much of which was parents' fear about children returning to school, because of the extra investment we have made, I think we have made contact with every single parent now, family that is home educating, and assured ourselves as much as we possibly can around the safety for those children. We are a referral-based service in terms of safeguarding. So for example, we can't kind of, in terms of child protection, we can't walk around the streets and kind of make decisions around. We are referral-based, But in terms of electively home education, I am confident that we discharge as much of that responsibility as we can, although I must reiterate, we have no right to insist that parents talk to us or indeed give us entry to their homes. And the government have not yet, although they said they would do, but they have not yet put in place the requirement for a statutory register for those families who are electively home educating, and thereby also extending the right to the local authority to contact those families.
Right, thank you. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any others? Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Being new to this committee, I just want to sort of make an observation around the number of task groups and panels that seem to be in place. It seems to be a real high number, and I just wonder whether they have any powers in their own right to do anything, or whether everything has to be referred back to the main board. And then secondly, is there any sort of cross-reference of membership with these boards, the same sort of people sitting on a lot of these boards? And then finally, in relation to that, how do they sort of share information, or is there that capacity to share information quickly so that action be taken immediately in relation to the children, or does everything have to come back to the actual Children's Board panel, please? Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And to respond to that, so we have the 4 subgroups, and those subgroups have delegated authority in terms of delivering activity. They have a responsibility to deliver against the specific activity that they are responsible for. So, as I've described, the Wellington subgroup has a responsibility and an operating model and a performance framework around young people who are in Wellington, and that correlates across the other boards as well. So they are delegated, they are responsible for delivery of work. Where the safeguarding board sits is above all of those subgroups, and we hold the subgroups to account in terms of delivery of the work. And when I say we hold the subgroups to account, we're holding the statutory agencies who sit on those subgroups to account. So my role as independent chair is to be assured that we are delivering against the work plans that have been put in place. And those boards can continue with the work, but if they meet a challenge or a block, there is an escalation route into the board, as I mentioned, so that as the statutory partners, so we have senior representatives from the 3 statutory partners, they can work to unblock any of those challenges within their own agency. So we are an escalation route, but the subgroups that sit underneath us have absolute delegated responsibility to commission work and to get on with it. So we don't seek to put any time barriers in the process through people having to wait for us to make a response. But we will respond to escalations. If there is a priority, it will be notified to me and statutory partners so that we can resolve it outside of our normal monthly meeting schedule.
Thank you. Does that answer the question? Thanks. No others. Thank you very much for that.
Chair, could I just, sorry to shout from Shropshire. Is it possible if I could just add something to Sue's response there? Because I just wanted to make it clear that that the Safeguarding Board role is assurance around policy, process, practice across all safeguarding, all partners who have input into safeguarding across the county. In terms of Councillor Wilcott's question, they do not deal with referrals around individual children. So individual children are dealt through the relevant services. So through the first response service that the County Council runs is the way into children's services, where we take individual referrals about children, and then the individual agencies come together through the multi-agency safeguarding hub, the MASH, to discuss those children and agree what action each agency is going to take in response to those children, individual children and families. The Safeguarding Board do not get involved in that kind of operational level. It is the oversight of the whole system around policy, process, practice, learning. The response to individual families sits at an operational level.
No, yes, hopefully, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Sue, thank you very much for what we've been at it for well over an hour and a half. So thank you, and I think most people would agree it's been really enlightening and a welcome report. Before we move on, people want a 10-minute comfort break? Or shall we move straight in?
Chair, if I may, I'm going to exit because I'm not required for any more.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. I think we'll carry on, I think, relatively brief then. So if we're moving on to item 6, joint overview and scrutiny spotlight review on sexual harassment in schools, scoping report. Thanks again. I think most people have had a chance to see the report that came out. I think this is in response to Councillor Perry's very kind offer to be our representative on this on this review, and it's very much about whether members, what questions members would like to see asked. Yeah.
Yes, so members, this is the scoping report, which just outlines really the process that the review is going, the process that is going to be undertaken by the Spotlight Review. So you've got 3 members there, one from each of the overview and scrutiny committees. Mrs. Perry is your representative. Then we have Mrs. Edula and Reverend Metcalf from Prosperous and from Health and Care. The Spotlight Review has got a date now. It's on the 14th of January. We've got a large number of people attending from a range of agencies, including police. We've got Youth Offending Service. We've got dedicated safeguarding leads for within school. We've got primary and secondary representation. We actually have Sue from the Safeguarding Board will be attending as well. We have an opportunity at the conclusion of this meeting, so we've just got one more item in a minute, and then we'll have an informal session together, which is an opportunity for you to discuss the report around which this is going, the Spotlight Review is going to be based, which is the Ofsted report on sexual harassment in education. And then you can raise any questions there that you would like Mrs. Perry to take forward on your behalf to the review. So this at the moment is just the scope, so you can see what the intention is for the review, and then we'll discuss at the conclusion of the meeting in an informal session any questions that you'd like her to take forward, if that's okay.
Everyone in agreement with that? Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, we'll move on then to item 7, the work programme.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the work programme hasn't changed significantly since we last met. We have got an item which was due to come today, and we've put it back again, which is a presentation on the McAllister report, and that's because this hasn't been finally published yet. So I've moved that currently back to the February meeting in the hope that it will be published by then. The meeting in January is focused very much around adults, so you are actually going to get the Adult Safeguarding Board annual report coming to that meeting, as well as an item on deprivation of liberties, and also an update on safeguarding adults on the cusp of care, which is a report that came in September, and in that report there was a number of things that they said would be in place by the end of December. So this will just be a brief report so that you can assure yourselves that those were all introduced within the time frame that was suggested.
Thank you. Any comments, questions on the... No? I take it there's no other... We're not excluding the public for any other items, no. In that case, then I'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you again. I think if people wanted to just grab a coffee or something and be back in 5 minutes, and we'll just have a brief discussion about the sexual harassment review. Back at 5 too. Thank you.